everyone. Welcome to our next episode of Ghost Stories series. This one is about writing the ghost stories. You may have already seen our first one, Why Do We Like Ghost Stories? And if you haven't, it's also available on eSpec Books YouTube channel here. I'm joined tonight by my co-editor, James Chambers, and contributing authors Marc Abbott, Randee Dawn, Gordon Linzner, and Steven Van Patten. Okay, so you may be wondering, co-editor of what? Contributors to what? We have a really cool anthology of ghost stories. It's called Even in the Grave. Jim Chambers and I co-edited it, and it's being published by the Neo Paradoxa imprint of eSpec Books later this spring. It's part of a 3-book Kickstarter called Ghosts and Ghouls and Other Creepy Things. We have a video to tell you about that a little bit. Then I'm going to come back and ask all the folks to introduce themselves. Cool. That's a link to our Kickstarter, which is a bit of a long thing, but we'll put something in the chat for you as well that's not quite such a mouthful. But let's find out who these wonderful folks are. What I'd like to do is start with Marc Abbott. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you write?
Hi, I'm Marc Abbott. I'm a horror author from Brooklyn, New York. I write everything from ghost stories to monsters to serial killers, everything in between. That's what I love.
Scary stuff. Cool. Cool. All right. How about Randee Dawn? You can guess we're going alphabetical here.
Hi, my name is Randee Dawn. I am a journalist and a speculative fiction writer. I've written several horror short stories, and I have a humorous, funny, I guess that's the same thing, fantasy novel coming out later this year called Tune In Tomorrow.
Excellent. Gordon Linzner, tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, well, I'm Gordon Lindsey. I'm the original publisher of Space and Time magazine, which was aimed at putting together every possible genre we could think of. I write mostly horror, it seems, right now, but I've also written a lot of some science fiction, some straight-out sword and sorcery type fantasy. Actually sold 4 or 5 Sherlock Holmes stories in the last year, which shocked me more than anybody else. So I've been keeping busy for a while.
Well, suspense applies to many different genres, doesn't it? If you do it well in one, you can do it in another. Yeah.
Exactly.
Steven Van Patten, tell us a little bit about yourself, SVP.
Well, hi, everybody. Steven Van Patten, also from Brooklyn, also a horror writer, enthusiast, and all of that. I also do a fair amount of Black history work for a YouTube channel, Extra Credit, which you can check at extracredit.com.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you've recently gotten a nice little award for one of your little shorts, yes?
Oh, okay, so that's actually a comedy thing. It was for this other YouTube channel, Viral Vignettes. And it was basically supposed to be like skits, 2-person skits that were happening during the height of the pandemic. And the producers actually got Max Gale from Barney Miller and John Schneider from Dukes of Hazzard and, also being Superman's dad fame. And they acted the skit out, and a couple of awards just came down. But it's like I'm a little all over the place, especially with my own, my own
ghost,
stuff,
but it's fun.
Other stuff for other people. Yeah, but it's a lot of fun, absolutely.
Cool. Well, and now, Jim Chambers, can you give us a little bit of your background? I left you out of our contributor rotation. I just don't want people to think I don't know how to spell. So Jim Chambers with a C.
That's okay. I'm not one of the authors contributing to Even in the Grave. I'm the co-editor with Carol of the anthology. I am also a writer, an editor of other things. I won a Bram Stoker Award for the original graphic novel Kolchak the Night Stalker, The Forgotten Lore of Edgar Allan Poe. And most recently, I've published a couple of short story collections called On the Night Border and On the Hierophant Road, both published by Raw Dog Screaming Press. And earlier this year, or actually, no, wow, the time is just not something I can keep track of anymore. Last year, I published an anthology called Under Twin Suns, Alternate Histories of the Yellow Sign. Yes, as you can see it.
There it is, over my shoulder.
And I'm one of the, as I said, co-editor of Even in the Grave, and really excited to be here tonight with some of our authors who contributed some really amazing ghost stories to the book. And I guess we're going to talk about what it takes to write an amazing ghost story in 2022.
Yes, indeed. And one of the fun things to me for reading all these stories is that they take place in a variety of times and a variety of places. Even though all of our folks are from the local New York area, we have things all over the world and something for everyone and such. But let's start a little bit and think. We already talked in the other recording about why we like them, but let's talk about writing them and why do we write them? What is your purpose when you write a ghost story? Are you looking to just do a fun and spooky story? Do you have an ultimate, something you'd like to say philosophical about what happens to us beyond the grave? Does anybody got a thought on that they'd like to start out with?
I mean, one of the things I was thinking of when I was trying to figure out how I wanted to phrase why we write them. One of the things that I like about them is that there's an enormous amount of flexibility with ghost stories. It's not that you can't get really specific, but, ghosts can be funny or serious or deadly or helpful or present or invisible. I mean, they are practically a license to do strange things without necessarily having to do a lot of the heavy lifting that goes with a lot of other world building. It doesn't mean you shouldn't do any of that, but I think you can kind of start at a ground level with the whole ghost thing. Ghosts mean different things around the world, but we all kind of have an idea of ghosts. You say ghost, okay, start. And that I think is one of the great things, and they are just that flexible.
Mm-hmm.
I think Randee is right. Everything is more flexible. You can do so much with just that there. I've written humorous ghost stories. I've written, I hope, scary ghost stories, philosophical ghost stories. And what I like about ghosts in particular, at least my concept of the ghost, is that they're not real to the point where they can actually interact physically, which gives you a lot of interplay with psychological movement. Although there are variations of that too. We get to that later.
And what do you mean about philosophical points with your ghost stories, Gordon?
Well, I mean, sometimes, you can have a ghost show up and it's inspiring you to think of something that you weren't thinking of before. As, this person has lived this kind of life that I never considered before, or a character never considered before. And therefore you can play with that and have a little development going on. Sometimes you can even have the ghost developing something. Oh, you people are doing that now? Ooh, that's cool. Wish I was doing that when I was alive.
Oh, so then that's commentary on our social times. Well, that's interesting. Yeah.
I also think throwing a ghost into an extant story, it opens things up. You can have sort of a very modern day telling of whatever story you're telling. Once you throw a ghost into it, either one that is perceived or one that is sort of just in somebody's mind. I mean, there's a million things you can do, but it opens up to metaphysical questions that maybe all of a sudden weren't there. I mean, if you present a world in which all of a sudden, yes, a ghost does exist, that changes, I think, the way your main characters may think about life, death, what kind of person they are in this world. I mean, whether or not it makes them go into a religious area is another question, but I think it can change, to Gordon's point, the philosophical questions about the big philosophical questions all of a sudden can open up if that's the kind of story you're telling.
I'll jump in and just throw in that for me, ghost stories tend to be about not necessarily retribution, but definitely unresolved issues. Like, and I think that's one of the things that actually makes it like relatable, makes it like something that because let's face it, we all, I'd want to say it's part of the human condition to have unresolved issues. So it only makes sense that, you know, if we're trying to create a situation where we can try to, because let's face it, it's like most ghost stories you see, they're either a revenge thing or they've got something like some message. There's usually a message. I think that's why, you know, like the seance thing was such a big thing at one point, and you know, and stuff like that. Like the whole industry of contacting the dead, so to speak. All those folks on the corners with the crystal balls and whatever, that'll tell you, oh yeah, I can get to your Aunt Gladys and she can tell you where the money is in the wall, and you know, and all that stuff. I think all of that kind of like plays into our fascination or amusement, or you know, wherever you're taking the story. I think it all kind of ties in.
I find ghosts easier to talk to in terms of writing stories. You know, the fact that they do not have a body, that they're no longer, that they can move about much more freely. When I'm writing, I often tell people I talk to my characters a lot, and ghosts always fascinate me because they have so much more to say and so much more information to give. They can move, like Randee said, they can move in different directions, and I have so much that I can do with them. I can move them, and in fact, I can move them from one story to the next very easily without even having to tether them to any one particular thing. So for me, I find it fascinating to speak with them, and I also think that ghosts fascinate us over the fact that at some point, all of us are going to meet that demise. We're all going to leave this world, and they kind of, in their own way, give us a little bit of comfort to know that we just don't disappear in the end, that there is something, there may be an opportunity to continue to walk through this life, but in another form.
Of course, I guess my question would be like, is that actually a heaven or is that a hell situation? I mean, to be stuck in between planes after you die, you know, is that you're suggesting that it might actually be a positive thing, but I think most stories probably point it out as being you know, this is a terrible, terrible situation, and I'm angry, or I've got to solve something, or I've got to figure something out, and then I get to leave. But the goal is ultimately to leave, right? Not to stick around.
I think the goal is to leave unless you're going to the hotter place. Then
you want to hang out in purgatory for a bit.
Ghost is not necessarily a bad option. It's like, another Dwayne Reed, you know, and you just kind of like float around and take in the atmosphere. I don't know.
I've heard stories where the ghost just didn't want to leave. I like this place. Why would I leave? How do I know what it's like up there?
Here. Yeah,
I know all these people.
Jim, why do you want to tell a story about a ghost? You do. I mean, I know you edited, but.
Oh yeah, no, I love ghost stories. And first, I think, for to Randee's point, the moral of ghost stories is don't die with unfinished business. Make sure you wrap everything up. But no, I've always loved ghost stories, and I think that they are one of the broadest subgenres of horror fiction. Because, as everyone has been saying, you can take them in any direction. In fact, just thinking about the stories from the authors on the panel, I know we cover several different time periods. Each is set in a very different time period. Gordon's is set in a foreign land with a totally different context than some of the others. Oh, so is Randee's actually in another totally different
and a different time period, both
different
of them,
time period, different place. Steven's is very contemporary in its issues. Mark's is like the classic ghost story that we're talking about, where there's unfinished business from the past that resonates in the future, and that's what makes them fun for me to read, is that they can really come from any direction, and it makes them fun for me to write, because I do enjoy historical stuff in my fiction, and I like to do some research. And so anytime I've written a ghost story, there's always been an historical element to it or a cultural element to it that I've had to research and really kind of bring forward. So I like them as a writer. I like them for the challenge that they present.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Cool. Well, there's a classic thing that comes to mind when you think of a ghost story. You think of an old Victorian haunted mansion and a ghost in the closet rattling the chains. So when you guys approach writing a ghost story, do you want to use that traditional image, or shall we say trope? Or do you want to do something entirely different? And what guides that thinking for you? Is it convenient to use that, or do you use that to bounce off of? Who has a thought on that?
Yeah, I like to have, take variations of things. I mean, the whole rattling closet. If I were doing a humor story, that might work. So I just got a bunch of coat hangers in there. I don't know what's that rattling is. But yeah, I think different angles on every ghost. I try to do something a little bit different. Not every ghost is human. Sometimes it's an animal ghost. Sometimes it's not even a real person, like a tulpa, which is a created mental image. And I like to mix and match. You were talking about seances before, which another note on that. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, if you're doing like a seance or somebody reading Ouija board, in a sense, they're talking to themselves. And they think they're talking to a ghost, but they're actually getting their own impressions as well, which is also a very interesting way to handle the story.
And we do have a story involving a seance in the anthology by Teal James Glenn, which is very fun.
Yeah.
So looking forward to sharing that one with the world. What anybody other thoughts on using the typical ghost trope or approaching it differently? What's the best way in your mind?
Without giving too much away about my story, I mean, I chose the manifestation of my ghost to be a body part. And we'll leave it at that. But normally, and honestly, that only happened because that was just one of those things where, and I'm sure all of you can kind of relate to this. You're just kind of sitting there and you're working on the story, and then all of a sudden the thing just kind of writes itself. So, and whenever that happens, I always just consider myself lucky and I just rock with it. But in retrospect, if I were to sit down and do something right now, this very second, I'd probably go with something that's just completely invisible, completely inexplicable, and just, and basically just try to scare the hell out of people. That's because ultimately that is our collective agenda at the end of the day. Yes.
That's our purpose. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that what we're talking about is really that there are a lot of things that are very much in common, or I hate to use the word cliche because it's the trope more than a cliche, but the sort of the sheet, the eyes cut out of a bed sheet. That
was going to be our cover, by the way. Jim pointed that out in the other. That was going to be our cover. It'd be fine. Yeah.
That could work. I mean, I'm just saying that you have to sort of balance your tone with the number of very familiar tropes that you're willing to use. And, if you want to use those tropes to sort of get that out of the way and establish, yes, ghost, yes, can move things, yes, disappears or doesn't disappear kind of thing, then you can move on to your story. So maybe those can be a shortcut. But I also think that once you've done that, or once you've done a couple of those, if you're not doing a straight up humor one, as Gordon pointed out, I personally would dial back from that afterward and try to create your own new tropes or your own new things that are going to help tell your story better, because the more boxes you're checking off, I think the more people sort of they're not willing to follow maybe when you're running, when you're then going to go off the beaten path. And I think a stronger story does go off of the beaten path. We all know what ghosts are going to look like, but you need to describe what your ghost is going to look like. So people are not working off of this pre-imagined sheet with the holes cut out of it or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I like my ghost scene. I prefer when I write a ghost story that they can see the ghost. I think the shocking point of it is when you find out that they're not there. Usually when it's reserved to one person finally telling other people, well, I've been asking this guy over here, and they're like, what guy? Who are you talking about? And having it. I mean, that's always been my favorite type of ghost. I mean, the ones that you don't see, the traditional tropes, I go straight to The Changeling, the film, which scared the devil out of me as a kid. And still does to this day, with its creep factor of the ghost not being seen and then moving things around with its effort to try and communicate. But I do believe that you do want to get away from a lot of the tropes, because then it becomes way too expected in the stories. Every time, if you spice it up a little bit, ghosts can be creepy in many, many different ways. They don't just have to be invisible and moving, a spoon across a room. They can do all kinds of things, and that's the best way to use them.
Mm-hmm.
Just being there is creepy enough.
Yes, there's something to be said for that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Are you watching me while I'm taking a shower? Like, what are you doing?
Are you the reason it's hot water? Yeah.
Mhm.
No, I think I like Mark's point that they have to be seen, and I think maybe we could even take that just seen in a broader sense, maybe not always visually, but just have to be perceived, have to be interacted with in a way that's unexpected. And one of my favorite moments of ghostliness in anything, and this is going to be a total spoiler, but if you haven't read The Haunting of Hill House by now, I don't have any regrets for spoiling this.
It's been a few years.
Yeah. There's a scene where the protagonist is in bed at night and all sorts of terrifying, haunting stuff is going on, and she's holding the hand of her friend and thinking, well, this is the only thing that's comforting me. And the two of them are huddling together in silence, waiting for the haunting to pass. And it does. And then you find out later that her friend was not even in the room. Whose hand was she holding? And that sort of thing, when I read that book for the first time, that scene, I had to stop reading because it was such a chill. That was brilliant.
So how old were you when you read it, Jim? Just wondering.
Oh, I don't remember.
Young?
Yeah, younger than now.
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah.
But the Changeling, Mark mentioned the Changeling too, which is that's a great ghost film. That's a classic. I totally agree with that. But I also think at the same time that's where we reach the peak with the ghost story, in which the ghosts can only be put to rest if their bones are dug up and properly buried. So I do think there are some conventions or cliches that probably need to be, permanently
buried.
Put to rest and buried and stop haunting us, unless you can find a really fresh twist on it.
Yeah. So, it's something I've heard a couple of you say is use a trope, start out with the trope, but then, turn it up to 11 and, reverse the gears and spin it. That's an interesting way to do it.
Or how can you turn it completely around?
I also wanted to ask just what everybody thinks here, because in my mind, we've talked about ghosts moving things or being invisible or not being invisible. To me, like there's a bright line between a ghost and a poltergeist. I mean, I've always been under the impression that a poltergeist, you tend not to see it and it moves things, whereas ghosts cannot really affect the material world, or if so, can only do it like, oh, I feel a cold sensation. Where you wouldn't have this physical presence. I think, this is not a great movie, but in the movie Ghost itself, I think that we have Patrick Swayze's character who is the ghost. He's able to move things, but only with great effort, a lot of concentration. And like, to me, what we're talking about here largely are ghosts as opposed to poltergeists. But you guys, what do you think? I mean, am I wrong here?
I've never thought of a poltergeist as being something of a human spirit. I've never thought, I know in the movie Poltergeist, it was supposed to be that they were haunting the house because they wanted the girl. But the thing that took the girl in the movie was not one of the spirits. It was something else entirely. So I've always been under the idea that the poltergeist is somewhere between demonic and ghostly. It has enough malevolence in it that it can breach things in order to move them, but enough of the ghostly presence that you don't see it. So that it can stay hidden and do the things that it wanted to do.
Cool.
And the poltergeist, I believe, is not like a human remnant. It's a demon of some kind of spirit. I think a comparison of that is the way we've trained zombies, which was simply dead brought to life to work at the farm for you, until suddenly they're like self-conscious monsters. What you're seeing, well, the zombies now, those are not zombies. Those are just living dead.
Yeah, there's a difference. Okay, let's talk about the writing part. And in the old Victorian days when they wrote ghost stories and all, there was typically a very long lead in where you describe the scene and everything and the characters and what's going on, and eventually you'd get to some of the ghost stuff. But it seems with the advent of technology, people have a shorter attention span these days. Perhaps. Do you feel that you need to? No. What did you say, Randee? No.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Do you
I'm
feel?
sorry, I wasn't listening.
Yes. When do you feel the need to start introducing your ghostly stuff or your eerie stuff in the story? Does that happen immediately? Do you start with the ghost? Do you start with a normal thing and then slide into the creepy stuff? What do you like to do for a ghost story? And how soon do you need to show some ghostly stuff?
Well, I mean, depending on the format, whether it would be a book or a short story or whatever, I think the first thing you got to do is do some kind of character build with the people who are about to be haunted. Otherwise, when the haunting starts, you don't really care about the jeopardy that the people are in. Or at least not as much as you would if you just threw somebody in a house and like, okay, and here's a ghost, and okay, I'm leaving. It kind of becomes very matter of fact. So you got to have some kind of setup. I can't really say how long the setup would be. You'd almost have to feel it. At least that would be my approach.
Well, depending on how long your story is too. You got a 3,000 word story, you got to dive right in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, in the story that I've got in the book, even in the grave, called Fetch, you do not see the ghost until really almost toward the end. There's a bit of back and forth flash, scenes going back and forth in time, so you get a sense that something creepy is going on. But you actually don't get the ghost until probably like the last 1/3 to 1/4 of the book. I mean, it's important. It's not like, oh, here I am, bye. But it's not, that's not the focus. It's a lot of character building, a lot of story building, so that when you do get the ghost, there is some satisfaction as to what happens next.
And the cool thing about your story, Fetch, Randee, is that it is building creepy, dark, and awful before you even get to the ghost. So it's probably one of the darker stories in the anthology, right, Jim?
Yes.
Yeah, possibly the darkest.
The darkest.
Oh,
wow!
You would never guess.
Oh, Jim,
Meeting and talking with Randee that she writes.
You say the nicest things.
Of fiction. But I think two observations on that question. One is for many ghost stories, they are effective because it's about what subtle things about it's the subtlety of what's out of place. The subtlety of what's not right in the ordinary world. And for the reader to understand that, they first have to understand the ordinary world of those characters. And so I think that setup can really create a time and a place for the reader, so that when you knock a few things askew, it impresses them. And the other thing I'd say, ideally, if in the perfect ghost story, and I guarantee that this panel will not run long enough for me to think of an example of this, but in the perfect ghost story, the ghostly element would be right there in the first sentence without the reader knowing that it was there until they finish the story.
And then you get to it and you say, oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
That's cool. Well, that's cool. Now, we're talking about writing these days. What about the fact that we have some modern technology? I mean, look at us all here. We're haunting these screens, right? With the use of StreamYard and YouTube and all these things. Do you feel the need, or do you see a difference in a story you would write for an audience that understands infrared cameras and ways to track things and Ghostbusters and all those things? What has that affected the way a ghost story could or should be written?
It would depend on what period you're setting your story in.
Yeah. I haven't delved into having a ghost do anything with modern technology. I think that from the ghost perspective, I don't think they care how they want to haunt you. If they're going to haunt you, they're going to haunt you. If they need to reach out to you, I mean, they'll use. I guess they would use technology if they knew. I think there's been a couple of times in cinema where they've had like the ghosts working on the computer and responding to somebody, and just typing back to them in like in a chat or something like that, because they figure, oh well, that's the best way. This guy doesn't get off this thing, so the only way I can actually get his attention is to do that. But I don't, as long as the story is effective and as long as the readers can relate to what's going on, I don't think it makes a difference either way, whether the ghosts infect technology or not. But like Gordon said, it also depends on the time period you're using,
They can always use technology. I mean, back in the 60s and 70s, I seem to remember a few stories where the ghosts would haunt the television set, just show up on screen.
Yeah. Well, and you have things like
there's Poltergeist again.
Right. I mean, I'm thinking of Koji Suzuki's novel Ring, which was made into a very successful film franchise. And in that, you had to watch a video. At the time, I think it was still VHS, so maybe not the most contemporary technology. But then you got a phone call, so the ghost was using technology to haunt you, and ultimately came at you out of the television screen to kill you. So I think you have to look at what works for your story. How can technology help your story, or how can you channel things through technology? I mean, one thing that I've seen in a fair number of stories or ghost movies and TV shows is the ghosts show up and all the technology stops working, which is kind of a convenient way to not have to face those challenges.
It's like how you get rid of a cell phone in a current day story. Yeah, just call for the police. Oh, no, it's not working. Yeah.
To go back to the Ring real quick, though, when you were saying maybe it wasn't the most up-to-date technology, I think actually if you're writing a story and you want to use technology, maybe using the most up-to-date thing isn't the way to go. In other stories, you see the investigators, you see the protagonists digging into ancient tomes or using the equivalent of old technology. There is something that can be made spookier by using slightly older or out-of-date technology that's got an artifact feel to it that maybe would make more sense and make it spookier when you're tying it in with a ghost who inhabits it. I think that, in the Ring, VHS had already been gone for a while. We were way on to DVDs, not quite on streaming yet. But the fact that it was a VHS tape just made it some sort of random and more curious, especially, I imagine, for a generation that didn't grow up with them.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I'm actually thinking of Matheson's story. Was it the call about the woman that was getting the call from her husband? The telephone line had fallen into his grave, and he was calling her every night. It was a Twilight Zone episode too, and he would call her every night, and each night he would call, the call came in clearer. And she finally yelled through the phone because she didn't know who it was. Stop calling me and leave me alone. And the last night when she realizes who it is, he says, I'm not going to call you anymore. You told me to leave you alone. And then it just abruptly ends with that. So that was a very interesting way of using technology.
Oh, now I'm going to cry. Yeah.
Well, and just to comment on the range of stories, and even in The Grave, one of the stories that is in the book by Megan Arcuri is 100% up to date, technology driven, and it really works. And it was one of those cases where an author found the unique opportunity presented by contemporary communications technology to tell a really novel ghost story. And so I think it just says a lot about the elasticity of ghost stories.
It's very touching, yeah.
And yes,
Let's
yes.
think, what if you're wanting to write a ghost story, but you need a little bit of inspiration? Gordon, we were talking earlier about the lore of ghosts and how different legends can lend themselves to different story types. Do you have a couple ideas to throw at us on that?
Just thinking, like, if you're going into different venues, different lands, different ancient lands, current land, and so on, you're going to get a different look on ghosts. I'm thinking two in particular that I'm familiar with, the Japanese ghosts. You can tell they're ghosts because they don't have any feet. Somebody's walking through the hallway and suddenly there's no feet. That could be like throw you off. But I'm thinking of particularly Rip Van Winkle, where Winkle walks into this land with all the ghosts of Henry Hudson's crew, and they're all about 3 feet high because apparently in Dutch mythology, when you get old, when you become a ghost, you're losing a lot of your body, and so there's only about half of you left. Yes, exactly. So they you can do things like that, and if you make something up that's not even related to actual mythology, but something that sounds like it would work, that's even cooler.
So that can give you some cool world building. Yeah.
Well, Carol, I see we have a few questions queued up. Should we?
That too, yeah. Do you want to grab one for us, Jim?
Sure. Let's start with this question from Lost Signal Society. What are thoughts on the now fading associations between ghost stories and Christmas, though I guess still kind of popular in the UK? And I think it's actually gaining popularity in the US right now. I've seen a lot of people talking about this Christmas ghost stories, but do you feel like there is a best season for stories like this?
Yeah. Anybody have thoughts?
Are they talking about the story takes place during Christmas, or just reading of ghost stories during the Christmas time? I'm not.
I think there's a tradition of telling ghost stories around the Christmas time.
Okay.
Yeah.
But they're usually set around that time too.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, like I mentioned Japan before, their time for telling ghost stories in the summertime, July, August. That's the best time for telling ghost stories. It's when they have their March of 1,000 Dead, the night parades.
That's interesting. And it's lighter longer in the summer, so that's an interesting thing. I would have immediately thought that it was because it gets dark earlier and it's cold and you want to hunker down and be close together, but you can scare each other. Any other thoughts on Christmassy ghost stories?
Well, I mean, A Christmas Carol kind of is the thing, and that's the one that sort of ties it all together. And I wonder if that's what keeps it going, or maybe for some people it's like, well, if you're going to do a Christmas ghost story, that's the one to tell, but everybody knows it. Like this is not as familiar with me. I'm Jewish altogether, so I don't necessarily have this connection. But if it's there, great.
Or do you?
Or do you?
Well,
Yes.
Arguably, Christmas is based on a ghost story in the first place, depending on how you believe in the religion. But that's another story.
Yeah. And FDL has a good point that the Christmas Carol marketed the old tradition. They sort of took advantage of that long thing. Yeah.
Oh, totally. So for me, having written enough Christmas horror for people to actually publicly ask me, Steven, what the F is it with you and Christmas?
And you need to read them all. Everybody, you need to read them all.
Yeah, some of you were there when that came up. So like my thing, the thing that I did, it's called Granddad's Candles, and it's basically about a kid who's left home, and his estranged father is trying to break into the house, and he's one of those like, well, I need to toughen you up because you're just a this and a, words I'm not going to use right now. And what ends up happening is the ghost of the grandfather comes and deals with this. And what's, I think my setting it to Christmas in that instance was really more so that the mother could be stuck in a snowstorm. And I just kind of, I was just kind of creating an imagery with lights and, and terror and, and that sort of thing. Christmas is a great time, though, to think about ghost stories because, you end up, unfortunately, Christmas is a big reminder of whoever you may have lost in your family during that time. So I think, it all there's a lot of connective tissue there between all of those things.
And that is what a ghost story is. Who have you lost? Yeah. I see.
Yeah.
I see your point.
You're approaching the end of the year like the end of a life.
Yeah.
And real quick, Steven, just tell us where people can find Granddad's Candles, because that's a great story.
Oh, thanks. It's actually included in Hell at the Way Station, the anthology that myself and Mr. Abbott, who's he's here next to me on my screen. Him. We wrote a horror anthology together, and basically that was one of the stories in the anthology.
So I think it seems to me in general right now that Halloween, of course, is ghost story season in a big way, and of course all things horror become popular at Halloween. But I think there's sort of a tradition there of sharing those stories more and people diving into ghost stories around that time of year. So I think there's certainly a seasonal connection there, at least in the US. I'm not sure in the UK. Yeah, I don't know how big Halloween is in the UK. I know thanks to the efforts of horror author Greg Chapman, it is rapidly gaining popularity in Australia. Greg's on a one-man crusade to bring Halloween to a continent. But we have another really interesting question. Carol, can I jump to another one?
Yeah, I think we have time for one more, and then we'll do a little wrap up here.
This one is from Jim Ryan, and Stephen brings up an interesting point. Are the ghosts defined by who they haunt?
Yeah, which came first?
Yeah, and if so, how would that affect how you write a ghost story?
I think it depends on the story itself. Some ghosts are connected to the characters in your story. Other ghosts are connected to the locale where they're in. They don't care who's moving into the house. This is the house I lived in all my life. I'm staying here. Whereas otherwise, if it's like, the woman you've lived with all your life, you don't want to leave her, even though you died, so you're still hanging around there. And when she's gone, you get all those memories that are keeping you there as well.
Right.
Oh yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I would have to say yes, I guess, to a degree. I mean, to Gordon's point, I mean, if you end up picking the wrong house to live in, well,
oops.
You better just call somebody, or get on what's that real estate thing that
on Zillow, just check your real estate in Amityville really carefully for those on Long Island.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it can be a little bit of both, who and where they haunt. They are kept around for probably because of the person that they were connected to, but maybe they are limited to the place where they are because of being a ghost. The one title I wanted to bring up while I was here, and I know it's a movie, but it came out a couple of years ago called A Ghost Story. And it looks like it would be totally ridiculous because the main character is walking around in a sheet with the holes cut out. But it's very moving. He's sort of moving around in time, and he's there because that's where he was happy with his wife. And it's actually it's a slow moving but really emotional story that looks like it would be silly, but is absolutely not. And to me, that's about the place and the person as well.
Yeah,
I've been hearing this recommended so much, I have to go watch it. Yeah,
I think that actually came up in our first Haunted by Ghost Stories panels too, and it is. I've seen it. I think it's an incredibly compelling movie, and definitely recommend it for Ghost Story fans. It is, oddly enough, a really fresh take on a classic ghost idea, and works beautifully.
Yeah, and not super scary. I mean, it's not boo.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's more subtly disturbing than actually jump out in your face scary. That can be even stronger, make more of an impression.
Yeah.
Cool. And we just had. Oh yes, sir.
No, I in a reversal of things. I just The Others with Nicole Kidman, where the entire story is actually told from the point of view of the ghosts. And the fact that they are in this house because she's waiting for her husband to return, and then whatever other events take place within the house, they just never leave, but they chase the people out who are there, who are literally trying to contact them to find out why they're there. So
cool.
Yeah, it's a good movie.
Yeah.
And we've had just in general some comments in the chat about, is the ghost attached to a single place or a person, and does it follow you around? And I think those are all interesting things to explore. So thank you, everybody, for your comments and questions and such. I think this might be a good idea to just mention something more about our Kickstarter. We are doing this Kickstarter for the Even in the Grave anthology, but there's 2 other books in there as well. One of them is Rags by Ty Drago, and it's a cool Haitian voodoo story that takes place in 1980s Atlantic City. So I read an excerpt of this. I haven't seen the whole book yet, but I couldn't stop reading the excerpt. You know, I had some place to go, and I didn't. So, you know, it grabbed me. It really did. The other one is there's an interesting author for this other one. There's this fellow named Jim Chambers, who's had a series of the Corpse Fauna saga with 3 out already. And this is the final one, Jim, called Eyes of the Dead. Is this the final one? Or
yeah, this completes the originally planned Corpse Fauna cycle. Whether it's the final one, I suppose, is a little bit open to how people respond to this book, but it does conclude, and I've written about this in the books themselves, it does conclude a project I've been working on since roughly 1997. So it's been a long time in coming to completion. And my Walking Dead are a little different than the other Walking Dead you're used to. So
they're going to keep an eye on you. I know that much. Yeah.
Exactly.
You have to read them to find out what that means. Yeah.
And but before we come to a close, one thing I'd love to hear is if each of the authors could give us like a really quick one or 2 sentence description about their story and Even in the Grave.
Yes. I know it's hard to do it in 1 or 2 sentences.
That's it.
Okay, well, mine is set in ancient Japan, around 15, 1600. And like we were talking about starting a story and not knowing where the ghost is. I think in my case, the ghost figure does show up early on, but you don't realize it until the very end. So now I've given it away.
That was well done. Yes. Very cool.
No, he hasn't. Read the book.
He didn't give the end. Yeah. Okay. Who else is feeling
You don't know which one I'm talking about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, mine is it's basically about a guy who was involved in a horrible accident when he was 10 years old, and basically he ends up paying a horrible price for it later on down the road.
And it makes me cry every time I read it, just like so many of your stories. Yeah, it's awesome. All of these are. Gordon's with a great setting in the place. SVP, with the heartstrings. Mark, tell us your story.
Mine concerns a man who discovers that his father has kept from him a very, very terrible secret about who he truly is. And he finds this out in a very almost violent way, whose child he belongs to.
I loved the way you pulled the twist on us in this. It was so much fun to read, and then you pulled the rug out from under us almost literally. So cool. Randee?
I love a good twist. I can't wait for that story.
Yeah.
So mine is more of an upstairs downstairs romance that starts when a young girl saves a dog from drowning, but it curdles pretty quickly and just goes downhill from there. That's what I would say on that one.
Yeah. Oh, it's very compelling.
Well.
It does not end well.
You kind of know it's not gonna, but then other things happen that surprise you. Yes, it's very exciting. Well, Jim, it's been a wonderful lot of fun editing this anthology with all these great stories, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has.
Yeah, thanks to you guys, for your hard work also.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
You're welcome.
happy to do so.
Yeah,
So at this point, there are, I think, 8 days left in our Kickstarter. It ends on March 3rd at 9:17 a.m. Not that we're counting, but we have a lot of great rewards coming up. And if you're watching this panel afterward, please go check out the anthology itself, Even in the Grave.
Yes. And
yes, please do.
we'll close with a repeat of our little video from the beginning, if that sounds good.
All right. And thanks to all our panelists here.
Yes.
Thank you for
Thanks.
inviting us.
Thanks for coming.
For your stories.
Yes. Thanks for all people watching.